In January 1987, a man who had nearly died 18 months earlier climbed into a car with no working front suspension and kept driving anyway. The corner had failed in the very first kilometers of the Paris-Dakar prologue, and by the time the damage was assessed, he had fallen to 274th place out of the entire field, with more than 12,000 kilometers of desert still ahead of him. Everyone around the truck expected the story to end there. Instead, it became the opening chapter of one of the most improbable comebacks rally raid racing had ever seen, and the machine underneath him was not built for comfort or forgiveness. It was a Group B rally weapon that technically should not have existed anymore, reborn for a different kind of war. How does a car engineered to win asphalt and gravel stages in 90 seconds end up conquering the Sahara instead? To understand why that car was even in the desert, you have to go back to the end of 1986, when the sport that had built it stopped existing. Group B rallying had produced the fastest, most dangerous rally cars ever homologated, and the Peugeot 205 Turbo 16 was one of its crown jewels, a mid-engined, four-wheel drive missile that had delivered back-to-back World Rally Championship manufacturers' titles in 1985 and 1986. Then came a string of fatal accidents involving spectators and drivers across the championship, and Motorsport's governing body pulled the plug on the entire category with immediate effect. Peugeot Talbot Sport was left holding one of the most sophisticated competition cars on the planet, with nowhere left to race it. That is where Jean Todt enters the story, the man running Peugeot's competition department, long before he became famous for leading Ferrari's Formula One resurgence. Todt was not the type to let a finished engineering program simply die in a warehouse. He looked at the rulebook of a completely different discipline, rally raid, and specifically at the Paris-Dakar, a race with none of the restrictions that had just killed Group B, and made a bet that sounds almost reckless in hindsight. Take a car built to survive stages measured in minutes and rebuild it to survive a race measured in weeks, across a continent, through sand, rock, and heat that could break an engine in an afternoon. The technical challenge was brutal because a Group B car and a Dakar car are, structurally, trying to solve opposite problems. A rally stage car needs to be light, short, and explosively responsive over a handful of kilometers. A Dakar car needs to carry enormous amounts of fuel, survive days without full service support, and keep its mechanicals alive over distances that would destroy a normal competition engine within hours. Peugeot's engineers took the 205 T16's tubular steel spaceframe chassis and stretched the wheelbase by roughly 328 millimeters, creating an entirely new compartment between the cockpit and the engine bay that had never existed on the road-going rally car. That new space was not decorative. It existed for one reason: fuel. The desert punishes any car that cannot outrun its own thirst, so engineers packed a main tank of around 190 liters into that stretched section, alone taking up the full height of the cabin from floor to roof, and then added two further 75-liter tanks elsewhere in the structure, giving the car somewhere close to 340 liters of total capacity, some sources citing figures closer to 350. Without that redesign, the fastest rally car in the world would have been stranded in the dunes on day one, which tells you everything about how differently a Dakar machine has to be engineered compared to the car it was born from. Stretching the chassis solved the range problem, but it created a second one that the engineers had not fully anticipated until testing began. A longer wheelbase changes how a car behaves in the air, and on the Group B stages, this 205 already had a well-known habit of diving nose first the moment it left the ground over a crest, on a tarmac or gravel special stage that was merely uncomfortable. Landing nose down off the top of a Saharan dune at speed, blind, with the driver unable to see the terrain on the far side, could be fatal. This was not a footnote problem. It was the kind of flaw that could end the entire program before it ever reached Africa. The solution. The Peugeot Talbot Sport engineers found was almost elegant in its simplicity. Rather than redesigning the rear wing to change position dynamically, they fixed it permanently in its position of maximum downforce, locked there at all times instead of adjusting through the stage the way a normal rally aero package would. At roughly 200 kilometers per hour, that constant rear-end loading meant the car would glide almost level off the top of a dune instead of pitching forward, letting aerodynamics override the inertia that had made the standard 205 T16 so nose-heavy in flight. Engineers reportedly found that with enough throttle in the air, the car could even be made to rear back slightly rather than dive, a complete reversal of its Group B behavior achieved with a single fix setting rather than a redesign. Power was the next trade-off, and it is where the Grand Raid version diverges most clearly from the numbers people associate with the Group B legend. In its final evolution to rally specification, the 205 T16 had been pushed past 500 horsepower, reportedly capable of reaching 60 miles per hour on loose gravel in around 2.3 seconds, figures that remain startling decades later. The Grand Raid version deliberately walked that back. Freed from championship homologation limits, but constrained instead by the simple reality that an engine cannot be pushed to its absolute limit for 2 weeks straight. Without support trucks nearby, Peugeot detuned the unit for durability, prioritizing an engine that would still be running on stage 20/1 that produced a headline number on a dyno sheet. That trade-off between raw output and long-distance survivability sits at the heart of what makes a Dakar machine fundamentally different from a stage rally car, and it is a decision every desert racing program has had to make since. A car engineered purely for peak power looks unbeatable on paper and can die in a sand dune on day 4. Peugeot's willingness to sacrifice bragging rights horsepower for an engine, gearbox, and 4-wheel drive system that could survive 14 days of abuse was not a compromise born of weakness. It was the entire strategic bet Jean Todt was making by moving into this discipline in the first place, and it would be tested to its absolute limit almost immediately. Which brings the story back to that failed suspension corner in the 1987 prologue near Paris, and to Ari Vatanen, the driver Todt had chosen to lead this new desert program. Vatanen was not an obvious pick for a comeback vehicle. He had won 5 world rallies in a row for Peugeot through 1984 and 1985 before a horrific crash on the Rally of Argentina left him fighting for his life and kept him away from competition for roughly 18 months, battling both physical injury and the psychological weight of nearly dying behind the wheel. Todt brought him back specifically for this new Grand Raid program, effectively betting the car's debut and the driver's rehabilitation on the same event at the same time. The corner that failed in the prologue was not a minor mechanical hiccup. It was a right front suspension mount giving way so completely that Vatanen could no longer steer the car to the right at all, and he still chose to continue rather than retire. He dropped to 274th position in a field competing across a route of well over 12,000 kilometers, a distance long enough that the deficit, while brutal, was not mathematically fatal. What followed was a sustained, relentless recovery. Through the special stages, Vatanen and co-driver Bernard Giroux clawing back positions day after day until, by roughly the midpoint of the rally, they had fought their way into the overall lead. It very nearly did not survive Mauritania. Somewhere in the depths of the Saharan stages, Vatanen's crew suffered such a catastrophic run of tire punctures in a single day that they exhausted every spare they were carrying, a scenario that on a normal road would simply end the day, and on Dakar's open desert tracks meant negotiating hazard after hazard on compromised rubber, weaving past rivals along verges littered with rocks and hidden holes. Vatanen himself would later say he still did not fully understand how the car avoided rolling or destroying itself during that stretch. It is exactly the kind of moment Section 16 of any honest account of this machine has to include. Not a headline statistic, but a near disaster that could have ended the entire redemption story in the sand. It did not end there. Vatanen and Giroux went on to win 10 individual stages outright during that 1987 Dakar, an emphatic underlining of just how fast the detuned, fuel-heavy, reinforced 205 Grand Raid actually was once it found clean running, and they crossed the finish line in Dakar as overall winners of the event, completing one of the most dramatic reversals in the rally's history, from 274th after the first special stage to first overall at the finish. Vatanen doubled down on the machine's credibility that same year by also winning the Faroes Rally in Egypt, proving the 1987 Dakar victory was not an isolated fluke, but a genuine demonstration of what the reborn Group B car could do once its engineers had solved the range, aerodynamics, and durability equations correctly. Peugeot's next move revealed just how calculated this entire program really was. For the 1988 Dakar, the team did not simply run the winning 205 again, they introduced a brand new car built specifically to promote the company's newest road model, the 405 Saloon, which had just been named European Car of the Year. The 405 T16 Grand Raid shared its underlying mechanical architecture directly with the 205, the same aluminum block 1.9-liter turbocharged engine mounted centrally and transversely, angled at 20 degrees, the same hydraulically actuated 6-speed manual gearbox driving all 4 wheels, but it wrapped that hardware in an entirely new body shell derived from the road car Peugeot wanted the world watching. Technically, the 405 pushed further than the 205 ever had. It became the only Dakar-class car of its era fitted with genuine 4-wheel steering alongside its constant 4-wheel drive system and an electronically adjustable center differential, engineering that in its full rally-tuned state could extract something in the region of 650 horsepower from that same 1.9-liter unit, in a chassis weighing only around 950 kilograms dry, an extraordinary power-to-weight figure north of 600 horsepower per metric ton. The Grand Raid version, once again, deliberately gave much of that up, running closer to 400 horsepower and ballooning to somewhere around 1,300 kilograms once its far larger fuel load, over 400 liters once brimmed, was on board. The same philosophy TOTS engineers had already proven with the 205. Sacrifice the number that looks good in a magazine for the number that actually gets a car across the finish line in Dakar, 14 days and thousands of punishing kilometers later, rather than the number that only has to survive a single afternoon on a closed stage. Peugeot entered 4 cars for 1988. 2 of the new 405s and 2 of the previous year's winning 205s, a deliberately conservative hedge that turned out to be exactly the right call. During Stage 14, near Bamako, Jean Todt received a call demanding 25 million francs in ransom for the return of Vatanen's leading 405, which had genuinely vanished overnight. Vatanen was automatically disqualified from that stage for failing to reach the start line within the mandatory 30-minute window, and even after his car was recovered and he finished the stage in 8th position, the suspension against him was upheld, ending his own shot at victory in the car built to be the star of the whole campaign. That is the open loop this story has been carrying since the prologue crash a year earlier, and here is where it resolves in the most fitting way possible. With the brand new, more powerful, more technically advanced 405 eliminated by an act of sabotage rather than mechanical failure, it was the supposedly outdated 205 Turbo 16 Grand Raid, driven by fellow Finn Juha Kankkunen, that crossed the line first, delivering Peugeot back-to-back Dakar victories and proving that the older machines' stripped-down reliability still mattered more than raw horsepower or four-wheel steering when it counted. The car built to be a supporting act had, for the second year running, upstaged the star. Vatanen got his revenge the following 2 seasons. In 1989 and 1990, driving the matured 405 T16, he won the Paris-Dakar outright both times, giving Peugeot 4 consecutive victories across the 2 related machines and cementing the 205-405 Grand Raid lineage as one of the most dominant runs any manufacturer has produced in the event's history. By any measure that mattered to Jean Todt when he made his original gamble at the end of 1986, the bet had paid off completely. A car with nowhere left to race had become, within 3 seasons, the benchmark every rival in the discipline was chasing. Then, deliberately, Peugeot walked away at the height of its dominance. After the 1990 victory, the manufacturer redirected its competition budget toward the Le Mans 24 Hours program, leaving the Dakar stage to its sister brand within the same corporate group, Citroën, which built directly on the engineering lessons learned from the T16 Grand Raid cars to develop its own ZX Rally Raid successor. It is a rare thing in motorsport for a program to retire, not because it stopped winning, but because the people who built it decided the story was complete and moved on to write a new one somewhere else. Today, surviving examples of the 205 and 405 T16 Grand Raid cars live mostly in private collections and manufacturer heritage displays rather than active competition, occasionally reappearing at historic rally demonstrations where crowds still gather specifically to hear that turbocharged 4-cylinder note echo off dunes and grandstands alike. Scale model manufacturers continue to reproduce Vatanen's yellow camel-liveried 1987 winner decades later, a small but telling sign that the car's cultural pull has outlasted its competition career by a wide margin, still recognized instantly by enthusiasts who were not even alive when it crossed that finish line in Dakar. So return to that stretch of road outside Paris in January 1987, to a car with a broken front corner and a driver who, 18 months earlier, had been fighting simply to survive a hospital bed rather than a rally stage. The question was never really whether the 205 Turbo 16 Grand Raid was fast enough. Group B had already answered that emphatically. The real question was whether an engineering team could take a machine built for a sport that no longer existed and rebuild it, chassis, fuel system, aerodynamics, and philosophy, into something capable of surviving 2 weeks of Saharan punishment while still winning outright. 10 stage victories, a comeback from 274th place, and 4 consecutive Dakar titles across 2 generations of the same bloodline gave that question its answer. Behind every legend of the dunes, there is a story of people few ever hear about. Engineers stretching a chassis by 328 millimeters to solve a fuel problem nobody outside the workshop ever noticed. A fixed rear wing quietly rewriting how a car behaved in mid-air. A team principal betting his program's survival on a driver who had barely survived himself, and a supposedly obsolete car finishing what its flashier successor could not. The Peugeot 205. Turbo 16 Grand Raid was never supposed to exist past 1986. Instead, it became one of the reasons the Dakar Rally still means what it means today. The Peugeot 205. Turbo 16 Grand Raid was never supposed to become a Dakar legend, but against every expectation, it transformed a forgotten Group B weapon into a machine built to conquer the desert. From a broken suspension in the 1987 prologue to victory in Dakar and 4 consecutive titles across the 205 and 405, its story is one of engineering, resilience, and determination. If you enjoyed this journey through one of rally racing's greatest machines, give this video a like and subscribe to DAKARS for more legendary cars, incredible races, and the stories behind them. See you in the next adventure.